Okay. Well, welcome to our information session. I'm Deborah Peterson-Perlman. I'm in the Department of Communication. And
Natalie Belsky. I'm in the history program.
we have led this program once before in the summer of 2019, and we took 8 students with us. Is it 8 or 7?
7.
7. We were supposed to take 8, but we had 7, and we had a colleague from the college come with us as well. And it was a phenomenal experience. In spite of the topic, we had a lot of fun. I mean, there was some seriousness, obviously. It's a very serious topic, but we learned so much, and we're so grateful to have the guidance and support of the company on site that set up tours for us and so on and so forth. So we're
Facilitated.
Yeah, they were
Working with
phenomenal,
local operators. So that was really great.
Yeah. And just a terrific guide with us. And hopefully we'll have the same guide.
Yes.
That would be ideal. So we're going to show you a little PowerPoint that is a combination of efforts. And let's start here. Where's the slideshow? Where's slideshow?
Well, you know what? I think it's over here. Just need to
Okay.
move those. Present.
All right.
Yeah.
So if you want to.
Yeah. And before we this slideshow contains images from the trip in 2019. We will be, and I think it's it'll give you kind of a better sense of what it was like on the ground. We will be, the plan is to really revisit most of those locations. The itinerary is going to be, it has been changed a bit, but really not significantly. Certainly most of the highlights or lowlights, however you choose to see them, that you'll see here, highlights in terms of really interesting experiences are certainly part of the itinerary for 2022. Just to, before we get into the sites, I do want to make sure we explain the structure of the course. So it is a 3-week course, 4 credits. It is an interdisciplinary course. So it's cross-listed in history and communication. Students who enroll will select if they want to get history credit or communication credit at the upper, it's 3XX. So it is at the upper division level. So that depends on if you're a history or communication major or minor. It also, like any study abroad program, satisfies the global perspectives. The first week is an intense academic prep for the trip. So we're going to be providing background context, potentially some guest lectures, discussions, reading documents, watching some film, reading memoirs. So it's going to be starting some of the research while we have we have the library resources. It is going to be offered via Zoom to accommodate students who may not have housing in Duluth that week. So that's the week starting May 16th. May 16th. Students who will hopefully be interested in joining from other campuses who would find it difficult to come to Duluth. So given where we're at now with Zoom and virtual learning, we thought that was the best in terms of accessibility. Then on the Saturday?
Yes, Saturday.
On the Saturday, which is the 21st, we will be going to Poland. And it's about, give or take, I think we fly over on Saturday, which means we get there on Sunday, and then and then you depart Sunday 2 weeks from that. So it's 2 weeks on the ground in Poland. We'll talk about being based largely in Krakow, but also traveling quite a bit to lots of different places. So that's kind of the general structure of the time of the course. And for those 3 weeks, it is, obviously when you're in Poland, and most of the time we'll be together on various site visits, activities, so on. For that first week, it's also going to be an intense academic program, which means that you should plan to dedicate most of your time to that. That's not to say that we're going to be doing stuff from like 8 to 5, but that is to say that you're not going to have time to take another course or like have a 40-hour a week job that week. So it's 3 intense weeks, but you're getting 4 credits for that class. Final projects will be due after we return, so you'll probably most likely have work to do once you get back, but it won't be like intense 8 to 5 or anything like that.
So one of the things that Dr. Belsky mentioned was that we wanted you to have an opportunity to spend some time doing some library work, and that library work would be work that you would apply to the projects that we're going to assign. So we haven't finalized that, but if we follow the model that we used in 19, that would include a Shtetl project, which we'll explain, and then a final project, which can be of your own making. And one of the things that we found really engaging from the last time we taught the class was that students really tailor-made their final projects to suit their own academic interests. So we had some students from marketing, from social work, history, communication, and they chose projects that really interwove their own academic background and the material that we were presenting them. And it was really fun, I have to say.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's some great projects.
And this class is really a great opportunity if you hopefully have an interest in the topic, but if you want to craft your own final project, there's a lot of space for that. We're obviously happy to consult, and we'll be consulting with all the students and happy to offer suggestions. But there's basically 2 main projects. One is more structured, the Shtetl project. The final project is more flexible. And then the other assignments are basically responses and reflections.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the academic component of the class.
Yeah, another thing that Dr. Belsky alluded to was that we will have some people come into the classroom that first week, including folks who can help with development of certain tools that you can use in the creation of your projects. So one of the things that both Dr. Belsky and I are very, very keen on are story maps. We love story maps, and we think it is a really great tool to use for, well, frankly, you could use it for the Shtetl project, and it makes sense for the Shtetl project, but also for your final project. And if you've never done a story map before, this is a great opportunity to learn how to do them. I think you would find it a really engaging process. So these are the cities that we visited in 2019. And you'll notice that we're really staying within a particular circle of the country. We don't go too far east, we don't go too far north, and we don't go too far west. So the northernmost community that we'll be visiting is Treblinka, which is the site of one of the notorious death camps. We'll be spending 3 days, I think, in Warsaw, and it is a packed 3 days. We are doing so much intensive work there and experiencing great tours and great scholarship. We'll be visiting some of the best museums in the world on this topic, including the Jewish Historical Institute, Paulin, the Museum of Jews and Poles, or Jewish, Polish Jews. And we might be going to the Warsaw Uprising Museum as well. So this is the kind of experience that you just can't get in any other fashion. I mean, even if you were to do the online tours of these particular museums, it just can't compare to being there. So we're really excited about that. I think for me, one of the best, well, there were so many highlights really, but one of the best tours we took was in Łódź, which is also pronounced Łódź because of the Polish language. That was an incredible experience. This was the site of one of the largest ghettos, the second largest ghetto. The first largest ghetto was in Warsaw. the second largest ghetto was in Łódź. And our guide was so brilliant and so engaged and provided us with a tremendous insight. Another highlight was the Shtetl Tour. And this was a road trip that we took. And we visited these tiny little communities. We went to a cemetery in the middle of a forest that backed up against residential areas, and just learned so much by listening to our guide. It was incredible. We went to Częstochowa. Obviously, we went to Auschwitz Birkenau, and our home base is Krakow.
I think one of the real advantages of it, so as we said, this is a real packed program, and we do a lot to make sure that we can, you can get a lot of different experiences in those 2 weeks. One of the wonderful things about having Krakow as our home base is that it's an incredibly beautiful city, as you can see here, with a beautiful castle, the Wawel Castle, and we'll be doing kind of some of the more traditional sightseeing of learning about the history of the city, right? It's not all genocide all the time. Trust us, even we can't handle that. And it's a beautiful city. It's a great home base. It's one of the cities that was relatively well preserved during the war. Was not destroyed basically during the war, as Warsaw, for example, was, which had to be basically rebuilt. It's also a really interesting city because it includes a lot of really interesting spaces that reflect the history of Jews in that part of in Krakow. So we're going to be spending quite a bit of time in the Jewish neighborhood, Kazimierz, and also looking at some really interesting examples of the revival of Jewish life in Poland. Visiting the Jewish Community Center in Krakow. This is a meal that we had at an Israeli restaurant in Kazimierz, but also, of course, looking at the sites of the Jewish ghetto right outside of Krakow, and the Plaszow camp, forced labor camp, which was featured in Schindler's List, and visiting Schindler's factory. So one of the reasons we've decided to call the course Entangled Lives is that we're not interested in just studying genocide and death, but we're interested in studying what Jewish life was like in this area, and the legacies of and the continuity in some cases.
Right.
That's really important, of Jewish life in this part of the world.
So just real quickly, one of the illustrations of that is indeed this Hamsa. This is the Middle Eastern symbol that's supposed to ward off the evil eye. It's in the shape of a hand. But it's one of the illustrations of Jews and Poles entangled lives, because the Kazimierz district outside of Krakow proper has been commercialized with a number of restaurants that are dedicated to Jewish cuisine. And there's a bit of an industry, a tourist industry, that's centered around Holocaust issues. And so a lot of that is centered right in Kazimierz. So this little Hamsa is featuring hummus and baba ganoush and pickles and
which is interesting, because it's not really Eastern European Jewish food. It's Israeli
Middle Eastern.
It's Middle Eastern Jewish food.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting space, and for students who are interested in kind of perhaps business angles or kind of the tourism angles, there's a lot of debates about what is appropriate in this space, and
what is appropriation?
What is appropriation, right? And who has an ownership over these spaces? For example, I think at some point there was controversy about kind of Jewish themed restaurants not being owned by Jews, because the Jewish population is there, but it's not huge. It's relatively small.
It's not huge, and in some respects, in some parts of Poland, it's hidden, right? Because there's still anti-Semitism, and So there's not a real interest in being bold and in front. Although in Krakow, I'd say, the Jewish community is much more visible, right? And the,
Let's see if I can, I was gonna see if I could pull up an image of, oh yeah, this is modern Jewish life in Poland. So, what are Jews doing in Krakow? Having a great time. And there's some events, there's a bike race, I mean, to commemorate the history, but also to get at Jewish life in this part of the world.
so this Jewish Community Center will host dinners. They have classes. In some respects, it's teaching Jews to be Jews, which is very interesting. It's sort of let's learn about Jewish culture, but let's learn about Jewish culture so that you can embrace your Jewish heritage, which I think is very, very interesting.
And I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, if all things goes to plan, the plan is for us to have a Shabbat dinner
So the second slide here,
there. Sure. Oh, yes.
the second image is a kind of a, what you call it, a swap meet or an open market.
Yeah.
Where
yes.
Goods and artifacts are sold. And some of it is
Like a flea market.
flea market is probably a better term than swap meet, but there's some interesting artifacts there that I know some of our students brought them for us to look at, and we would, the cock and I has to say, well, let's think about what this is signifying. But you can see the Israeli flag there, but there is some, Nazi memorabilia, and various and sundry, like this image of the Jew here in the corner. He's okay, but it's a little bit of a callback to, you thought it was Jesus. Well, Jesus
Same
was
part
a
of the
Jew.
world.
At any rate, that was very interesting.
Did I skip some stuff or?
You did. Let me go back real quickly. Oh, Schindler's Factory. This was actually a really fun afternoon because our guide was a very, very passionate woman, and she was very committed to telling the story. We were up on one of the upper levels, and there was a rambunctious group below us, and she yelled down, "Be quiet. We're having a very serious tour here." She was fun, right? And then later that afternoon, we went on another tour, and we had another confrontational tour guide situation. So I guess that's meant to illustrate that the guides in Poland are very well educated. Most of them have master's degrees. Some of them have PhDs, and they're leading these tours. And they are absolutely committed to telling the story and presenting the information, which in this day and age is a challenge. Let's see if we missed something else.
No, that was.
That's just that was our crew. These were our students. We had one young man, and he was our
We're
token.
hoping for more gender diversity.
Yes, we would like more gender diversity. That would be good. But we did a lot of things together, and I think there was great harmony actually in the group.
Yes.
We were very, very lucky.
absolutely. I think. Well, I guess.
Stop there.
Yeah, I would.
Okay, this is Natalie's story.
Yeah, so this is an example of the kinds of things that you encounter when you're sort of on the ground. These are images from souvenir shops in well, this one was definitely Krakow, but Krakow, Warsaw. And these are little figurines. These guys are magnets, and they are stereotypically supposed to represent Jews. And when we walked into this shop right off of the main square in Krakow and picked up one of these and kind of asked the saleswoman, like, hey, what's this? What's going on here? And they explained to us that, well, yeah, it was like a little Jewish figurine to have in your house for luck.
A lucky Jew.
a lucky Jew. And obviously, I mean, you can see there that there's a lot of the stereotypic portrayals of, Jews in these hats, the kippas, the
Big nose.
big no, right, religious. Sometimes you see them with musical. Oh yeah, the violin, right? Kind of like Fiddler on the Roof theme. So and they're not antagonistic here, but there's certainly a lot of stereotypes going on there. And I mean, I think it, part of it gets to this idea of the Jew as some kind of trope or some kind of
Mascot.
image, yeah, rather than like actual human beings and all,
Well,
with a
it's,
really fraught history.
I'm gonna rat her out. She bought a couple of these.
I did.
She keeps them on hand. Some of them have little slots where you put a coin.
Yeah.
Well, let's think about that trope for a few minutes, shall we?
Yeah.
But it's,
I think this one is maybe holding a coin.
yeah.
It's hard to tell on this picture, but yeah.
So lucky Jew, maybe you'll get some money. So obviously we can't go to Poland with a class that's focusing on the Holocaust without visiting Auschwitz Birkenau. This is a difficult trip. I think it's a very challenging trip for many people. I think we've had our own emotional experiences there. I've been there. I think I've lost track, maybe 4 times, 3 times. And every time it is an emotional encounter. A lot of Jews whose heritage was in Poland will say, I will never return to Poland. It's a graveyard. And in many respects, they're talking about Auschwitz Birkenau. Well, this is a graveyard. And you get the sense that, what happened there was just so incredibly evil. And you're walking on paths that were traversed by people who met their death through execution, through disease, through labor. And it's tough, but it is so important to have that experience as part of our education on the Holocaust.
And I think this also gets us to some of the controversies surrounding these sites and the memorialization of these sites. I don't know if quite a few years ago now, it's been out of office for a while, there was a kerfuffle when President Obama referred to Polish concentration camps, which was not the right term, but the response to it was very heated because all of the extermination camps were built in Poland. They were built by the Nazis, but of course the space continues to exist in Poland, and in some cases Poles were aware or complicit in what was happening there. So the idea of how to deal with these spaces, how to tell that story, given everything that happened there and who was involved, is what continues to be a really fraught issue. Actually, just a few weeks ago, there was a case of vandalism at Auschwitz, which is not, unfortunately, not unusual. But the debates persist about spaces, and that's something else that we're going to be getting into in the class for sure.
So these are some more images from Auschwitz. And you can see, as we did in the previous slide with the roses on the platform, that people come here and they'll leave something to say, I was here, I acknowledge what happened. So these notes in the train tracks are an illustration of that.
And I should say that one of our students, and it's still Auschwitz, an example of a really interesting project that one of our students pursued was actually looking at how other people, visitors, tourists, I don't know if we can call it that, engage with these spaces. So, and I would say, most people are respectful. At the same time, we were walking there and we saw a couple kind of doing sort of like a photo shoot on the train tracks, and they were like kind of take pictures of each other. And it was not necessarily, I mean, it wasn't necessarily offensive, but it seemed like a really odd choice for where you want to do that. And you know, Auschwitz Birkenau is a site that, you know, hosts, I don't know, millions of visitors every year. So that, and there's actually been films done about how people interact with that space.
When we were there, we saw busloads of
Yeah.
students coming from Germany, from the Czech Republic, from other European nations as a way of educating young students. Also, students come from Israel and from the United States, March of the Living, as a way of acknowledging what happened there. I mean, for Jews, of course, it has a very particular meaning. And I think for, you know, European teens, it's, you know, probably a requirement, and they
And I think
experience
it's actually, I
it.
think it's a requirement.
It
for some
is.
schools.
It
So
is, yeah.
That's controversial. And I have a friend who happens to be Polish and a historian of the Holocaust. And so who's very, very passionate about this topic, but has some real issues with this policy in Poland of bringing students there. Students or kids who might be kind of too young to be there. And, you know, these are not the kind of places that you can just sort of plop people down and just say, oh, you know, let's learn about this today. And you need a certain amount of maturity and preparation to be able to deal with that. So there's issues there.
So Treblinka was also an extraordinarily meaningful and moving experience. Treblinka was another one of the death camps. This is northeast of Warsaw. And we had a phenomenal historian guiding us on this trip. But it's a very sparse memorial. Auschwitz still has barracks in place, in situ. We also see the remains of the crematoria there. We see the fences. That's not the case with Treblinka. With Treblinka, you get the sense of the footprint of the place. There's a tiny little museum that we went through. And then we just walked to this memorial site that features the large monument you see here on the left of the screen, but also these stones that represent the places from which people came. And it lists the city or the town where people were sent to Treblinka. And then this was a memorial project.
Yeah.
That was a ribbon around the perimeter, and very
With
interesting.
Names.
Yeah.
Names of victims. I think, you know, one of the things that when we developed this course, we talked about is not wanting it to be a tour of death camps, because that's just too hard, and at some point you become immune to it, I think, or it's hard to process it. I think these two sites, Auschwitz and Treblinka, provide a really good counterpoint in the sense that they're very different types of camps. Auschwitz, as we mentioned, is very, very well visited, and there's a lot of infrastructure to actually look at. Some stuff has been destroyed, but there are barracks, there's lots of different buildings, there's different parts of the camp. There's a lot of material stuff to go through. Treblinka was largely destroyed. It raises lots of interesting questions for students who are interested in thinking more and researching more about that, about commemoration, and how you commemorate and deal with these spaces. I think this tour ended up being, I think, the most impactful for most of our students. I think it is one of those spaces where we could show you 10 million pictures of it, but being there is just like very, very different.
Natalie had a friend, a colleague, who had done, was working on a dissertation looking at the soundscape of Treblinka. And it was fascinating to sit there or to stand there in silence and take in what you heard in that site. I mean, it gives me chills just thinking about it. Listening to birdsong, the absence of city noise, just an absolutely silent location. And you're confronted with the memory of what happened there. So it was a stirring experience for our students. And they had been to Auschwitz first.
Mhm.
And when we asked them, well, how was this experience different? They were quite vocal about how this was a much more weighty experience than Auschwitz had been. Auschwitz was kind of a barrage of things. You're seeing all of this stuff. The museum itself is much more extensive. You're walking a great big footprint. This is more
A lot of
contemplative.
information being thrown at you.
Yeah, and this was much more contemplative.
Yeah.
Oops. So Pushoff is the camp that was featured in Schindler's List. So this is where Amon Goeth, the demon commandant, was located. This is a fascinating place because it is, my experience of it, and I've been there a few times, is that it's being almost like a park. And people will take picnics there. They'll take walks, they'll take bike rides, they'll take their dogs through this site. They're developing a little bit more too. This monument in the center here, and you can see it in the left-hand slide as well, is called the Monument of the Broken Hearts. Now, I think this is one of the more interesting monuments that we saw because it's so resonant of different meanings. So the broken heart or the absent heart, the weight on the necks of the people who were imprisoned there, the clenched fists, all of these things are very symbolic and meaningful. And this is right on the edge of Krakow.
Yeah, and I think walking, again, it's a situation where walking those spaces and seeing the way in which people interact with those spaces and how it's positioned in regards to the city, it raises a lot of important questions and discussions. Want to make sure we have some time to talk about more logistical stuff.
Why am I not? There we what? I don't have my glasses on. There we go. That's just
This
more.
Warsaw. Yeah, here are some images of Warsaw. I have included some more fun images of the city, and most of the downtown was reconstructed. Kind of historic downtown was reconstructed, but I wanted to. But one of the things that I did want to mention is, for example, when we talk about the importance of sort of being on the ground there, one of the things you can see in Warsaw are the demarcations where the ghetto wall stood, and you literally this is in the pavement. So when you walk along those streets, you see, okay, this is where the ghetto was. This is where the ghetto ended. And just the spatial element of that is I think really important. The Paulin Museum is one of the most incredible museums that gets at both the tragedy of Jews in Poland, but also the amazing culture. This is a recreation. It's hard to see in this image, but it is one of the most amazing exhibits there. It is a recreation of a bima, or the center altar of a synagogue in a Polish town that was destroyed. I mean, most synagogues in Poland were destroyed during the Holocaust. Many of them were wooden, many of them were extremely intricately decorated, beautiful. And this was the result of a painstaking project by artists and architects to recreate this beautiful space.
And they
Gorgeous.
moved it inside the building.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. So this is hand painted. There's nothing manufactured about it. It is hand painted, handcrafted. And I think this is probably why it took so long for the museum to be built.
Right.
Because this is such an incredible, painstaking exhibit. And you're just not going to find anything like it anyplace else in the world.
I skipped. These are some other sites that in Warsaw specifically. The Jewish Historical Institute was another site that was extremely memorable. The visit was extremely memorable for many of our students and ourselves, of course. The Jewish Historical Institute houses the archive called Onek Shabbat, which was an incredible archival project during the war, where Jews living in the Warsaw Ghetto, led by historian Emanuel Ringelbaum, collected documents, memoirs, posters, flyers,
Ephemera.
anything to document the life of Jews in the ghetto. It had this incredible foresight and incredible like selflessness to want to, in the midst of this impossible difficulties, to want to preserve this record. And the material was buried in milk cans under the ghetto. Incredibly, one of the people who knew, I think there were like two people who knew where they were buried, and one of them survived. So they were able to recover most of, I think 75%, because there's one or two
missing.
that's missing. But it's just, it's an incredible opportunity to see these documents. The exhibit there focuses on the documents and on the stories of the main actors who, the main historical actors who participated in this project. And we got a chance to work with some of those documents.
So the staff of this institute created a project for our students and for us,
Yeah,
where we were handed a piece of ephemera and said, why would they keep this? What's the message behind holding on to a candy wrapper or a play ticket, you know, or a menu of some kind? Why would they keep this? And so, you know, we had discussions, and I mean, a very insightful way of engaging with the material, which I thought was great. The Uprising Museum is important. It's very important to the people of Warsaw. Boy, talk about student visits. You're going to get busloads of students coming in any given day to go through this, because I think it's a mark of pride. You know, this is what we did. You know, this is how we stood up to the forces of evil. It's really dark. It's very dark inside, and it's loud.
So this is a museum that's dedicated to the Warsaw Uprising that there was a uprising in the ghetto, which was led by Jews in the ghetto. And then there was a broader uprising of Poles. So this is focused on the Warsaw, the not the ghetto uprising. And I think looking at this space, which admittedly is not our favorite space in terms of the museum, but I think it's really important in talking about Jews and Poles, and the way in which both groups interacted with one another and reacted to the realities of the war. I think it's this.
Yep. So these are some images from the Shtetl Tour that I alluded to at the beginning of the hour. You know, just incredible spaces. This was a little synagogue that our guide took us to.
You can see the decorations, these images don't do justice to it, for sure. But this is one of the few surviving synagogues, and it's just beautiful.
It's amazing how intact it is. I mean, you're not going to find it. Yes, Elizabeth.
I don't know what Shtetl is.
Thank you. By the way, lots of disagreement about definitions.
Yes.
But you can think of it as a community, a village, a living center, concentrated with Jewish population.
It's kind of, the idea is it's a small town, small city town, where Jews made up before the Second World War a large percentage of the population. This is sort of the arena of kind of Fiddler on the Roof. That's sort of, it's idealized, and that's not
right. There's romanticized.
You know,
I mean, tremendous nostalgia for these places where, you know, people came from, and you know, one of the great tragedies, I think, is the disappearance of the shtetl. Because the Jews in those shtetls were destroyed, they were eliminated, exterminated. So this was just a phenomenal experience, and our guide was very knowledgeable and took us to this little cemetery that is in the middle of the woods.
Yeah, the woods.
You know?
And that's part of the debate in Poland, and a debate that not just in Poland and other parts of Eastern Europe, that we hope to engage with while we're there is, you know, what to do in these spaces in these smaller towns, and what to do with the physical remnants, like tombstones, of a Jewish community that previously played a huge role in that town, but is just no longer there. And how do you take care of these spaces? Should one take care of these spaces? For example, this was a millstone that had been made from a Jewish tombstone. Because the stones had been taken, it had been discovered that stones had been used from the cemetery. Stones had been used to like pave the streets and for other purposes.
Wow.
So it's again, it's an important question of, you know, what do you do with these things? How do you take care of them? Who's going to pay to take care of them? Who's going to get paid to take? I mean, it's a complex economic and cultural and political issue.
And I'll just to dovetail on that, I went on one of these cemetery tours where our purpose was to clean things up and to take care of the trash that had accumulated, to weed and so on and so forth. This was phenomenal. This was an incredible experience.
This is a museum dedicated to a family who hid Jews. Unfortunately, they were discovered and killed. But it is all now, I mean, it is named after this family, but also now is basically the museum dedicated to all the righteous who, those Poles who helped save or tried to rescue Jews. And it's politically a very complex space because this is the narrative that the authorities, or the official narrative that is really being kind of pushed. And these stories are obviously really important, but there's a lot of debate about how you define sort of righteousness and rescue. And the museum is very insistent on telling a particular type of story.
And so you see this sign down at the bottom: external guides are not permitted to guide the exhibition. And the young man in the lower right was our guide. And it was an interesting experience. And again, this was brought to our attention by another PhD student who was friends with Natalie. And she gave a wonderful presentation for us on it. This is the Lodge Ghetto. We should move ahead.
Yeah. I as you can tell, there's a lot to share. These are some images from our tour of the Łódź and the Łódź Ghetto. We should talk about the I mean, I can also open the site for the program. We're happy to obviously entertain your guys' questions. Some great images of Krakow and Polish food. And I kind of went over the academic components of the program. The applications for the program are due by February 1st. If you're interested, please talk with us, try to get your applications in earlier. More information about the program is available on the program's website, as well as a budget breakdown. More of this information about kind of the highlights of the tour and the dates of the tour.
But do you have any questions that we can address for you?
I have to head out because I have another meeting, but thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
So I didn't put your name.
Amanda.
Yeah,
I'm a sophomore.
Okay.
Super.
Feel free to contact us if you have
Thank
any
you so much.
questions.
Thank you. You don't want a cookie on the road?
Oh, I got it.
James, do you have any questions?
just want to think about art, stuff like that, that's gonna be a big question.
Yep. Yeah, and I think as I said, the information on the cost is on the website. It is important that the cost includes, airfare, accommodations. And there's a lot, there's fees that go into transportation. So all of that is going to be covered in terms of getting from city to city, museum entrance fees and all of that. So that's, that's some part. We think it's really important to work with a provider like that we work with in API.
Somebody on the ground.
Because
who
they're on the
knows.
ground and they speak Polish, and that's super helpful.
And they're part of that community of scholar tour
Yes,
guides.
yes. The expenses, I think expenses once you're there can be, I wouldn't say that minimal. We're covering a few meals, but not a lot of meals. Poland is certainly on the cheaper side in terms of traveling in Europe. And it is definitely possible to eat there without to not
Breaking
spend
the
a ton
bank.
of money on that. I mean, if you want to spend a ton of money, you can do that too. But it is relatively affordable, certainly when it comes to in comparison to other parts of Europe. Of course, you need to make sure that you have the resources to get your meals and things like that. But that's, I think our students found that it was, it's not crazy expensive.
Anything else?
So, students,
Isabella, Gunnar, you want to ask questions?
any questions? You're,
But I don't want to interrupt. Process, but the slide showed what?
The map?
we're doing in Poland now. It was the first or
yes,
second
what
slide.
are
Yeah.
Jews doing in Poland now?
That's right.
Yeah.
That one. Who's the target audience for that? I mean, is that in Poland?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I
So
think,
do they write, are there a lot of English speakers there? Do they do, I guess I don't know what Polish writing.
that's a good question. I mean, I think there, like in many places, English is sort of like the lingua franca. So a lot of people certainly study English. I think partly, yes, partly something like that is also dedicated, it's also oriented towards visitors because there are a lot of people coming through town and scholars and researchers and people from Israel and the United States, Jewish students coming on tours. And that center is really dedicated to this idea of like, yes, we want to respect the past, and yes, we want to, of course, I mean, not just respect the past, talk about the past, but let's also talk about Jewish life in Poland. Now, there's a music festival.
Yes, there's a Kazimierz Music Festival that is internationally popular. James Levine, Itzhak Perlman has been featured there. Klezmer, it's a Klezmer music
Yeah.
festival. So yeah, but in terms of who that's targeted toward, I would say it's targeted to people interested in Judaism in Krakow. And so that very often is people who have, some kind of Jewish background. But it's also people who are interested in exploring Judaism.
And that's something that we definitely encountered. I mean, one of the other aspects of one other wonderful advantages of doing study abroad is that you get to talk to people there. Now, obviously, most of us are not Polish speakers, so you're not going to just talk to people on the street. But we had incredible conversations with Piotrek, our local guide, and some of our tour guides, several of whom were not Jewish, but were just really interested in, they dedicated a lot of time and energy to studying this history and talking about this history and sharing this history. And a lot of it comes from this idea of particularly not just younger people, particularly younger people finding that rediscovering the history of the Jewish communities that had lived in the places where they called home. And
The graphics of it look very Western, it looks very modern.
yes,
Very contemporary.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
contemporary. But there is this sort of, I think, particularly with our Krakow tour guide, we talked about this kind of rediscovering a history that's been that hasn't been discussed, and kind of just wanting to find out about these people who had lived in these communities, and just really excited to learn about, to go to Shabbat and to learn about what that was like. So that is really, really encouraging. So having those conversations is really important. At the same time, you have other types of conversations where I think we were at some point it was implied to us that we should focus on the Warsaw Uprising Museum, which was the right museum to go to in Warsaw, not Paulin, because the right history that you needed to be studying was the Polish uprising history. So there's that kind of thing as well.
Well, and there's also the political climate.
Yeah.
Right. The political climate of Eastern Europe has taken a decided turn to the right. And we experience that not just in terms of, the question of Jews, but also the question of gays in Poland and other kind of more what we would term progressive concepts and experiences. And that's important to talk about, but we also have to be mindful that we don't want to get our hosts in trouble. And we have to be careful about the context in which we have those discussions. And we tend to do that mostly here.
Yeah, but I think as anything, once you're there and once you get to meet people, a lot of the people that we meet, like our tour guides, are very much not on that page.
They're like-minded.
And as we all know, the political leadership of a country does not represent
The people
does
necessarily.
not represent people necessarily, and as in any place, right? There's a lot of diverse views. So I think that really gives you, and some people are really interested in talking about those issues and
Yeah.
topics.
Yeah.
I had a question that to do with the signs that guides may not guide
Yeah.
groups. I'm wondering if you had a guide who went to listen to the presentation.
Oh, yeah.
And then offer acknowledged statements.
He did a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't think I think he wanted to be very respectful.
Yes, yeah, I just was thinking-
But yeah, I mean, because that particular museum was sponsored in large measure by this Polish state and the Catholic Church. And so those frames make a difference.